So I looked at the data. I think that maybe if it was a proficiency test, maybe we would all kind of fail, but well, we have some data to look at. We had issues with the first class too. Your data really isn't that much different than theirs. The thing is with all of us setting up, basically there's a new lab we're just walking into that equipment just arrived and supplies just arrived, and here we go, here's some protocols. And obviously it's hard to replicate some of the exact things that you're doing in your lab when you have it all streamlined. So I know that there are probably some issues in the protocol, maybe little details that I may be used to every day of doing that I'm not communicating down the road. There's a couple of things that we think is going on. First, I talked about the first class having static issues. And I think we kind of solved some of those issues in the second class, because I didn't notice as much static. And also in some of the samples you collected, we looked in the tube, we saw a lot of things floating around. We kind of improved that one by, on my side, I used kind of a vaporizer, and also increasing the volume in that tube cap helped with that static. But some of the things like this, that's a very large room. And both of myself and the Louisiana lab, we found that it's better to be in a smaller room where you can control that environment. So what we had done after the first class is Kelly and I, we were here on Wednesday, and we just collected a couple of samples on our own to see if it's, it might be a user thing with our experience. We thought, well, we will make sure we collect the number of samples. And so Kelly collected some. I was only able to collect one set. And what she also did, just to see is the downstream analysis working, she just cut a big piece of the membrane into the tube and did that analysis. So I'm just going to point out the first one is a mixture, because that's what she did. She just cut a big cutting, and this is just one of the panels here. So okay, she cut a big cutting, and so we did get results, and we're like, okay, it's a mixture. The only thing that I find interesting when I see this, using my protocol with the low copy number, if I would have done this in my laboratory, everything would have been really off scale. So I know there's something downstream that we're doing in this lab we're losing some kind of sensitivity. I don't know what that is. Let me just see the next page. I haven't even looked at it. I mean, I guess the XY is pretty high. But actually, with a big, huge cutting like that, I would have just seen, you probably would have seen just everything off scale and tons of other artifacts. So that was just kind of keyed me into, we are probably dealing something downstream that's not quite working. So let us look at some of the actual data. So Kelly, she had cut 75 sperm cells on Wednesday. And the writing underneath, those are the actual types they should be of the sperm donor. And the first thing I noticed right off the bat, and I wonder if I can still use this pen on here. I'm going to see. Will it work? Yeah. One thing that I noticed right off the bat is that if you cut 75 sperm cell, you should be getting much higher RFUs than she did. Now, one nice thing is that, yeah, we have a lot of the alleles, but not all of the alleles. And we detected some. But we don't have that 15. Actually, it's not too bad.
How much higher are you expecting?
At 75 sperm cells, I would expect it to be close to saturated, like really close.
It's a different 3130 or 3100, so you can't.
Yeah, and that's what I was told. I didn't think actually it would be such a huge difference between samples that I would normally expect it to be very close to saturated, like, because if I collected 100, I would expect things to be off scale and be having difficulty. So we thought, well, let's just throw 75. That should be plenty. But these are pretty low. So do you think that actually instruments would be that different to the point where you would have an order of magnitude difference between hundreds and thousands?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
You have to validate each 3130 individually and make the parameters.
This is a 20-second injection.
Yeah,
we have the 10-second or 11-second, which is what her protocol normally calls for. But 11, I just bumped it up just to try to get data for you
What
guys.
did 99478 look like?
It looked normal, didn't it? The standard?
Well, it's diluted 1 to 20.
Oh, that's right.
And then added to the PCR. So it looks great, but I don't know what you
I mean,
would
it's all
expect with a
called
dilution of 1 to
correctly,
20.
but remember it's low copy number. So she's not used to the way it should look using her protocols, but because she had to dilute. Remember, since we did 34 cycles, we diluted out the standard to start with. But it looked fine in terms of when I looked at it, I said it looks like how it should look on any of my normal amplifications. So I don't know if it's the extraction or something like that. I'm thinking it's somewhere in that extraction mode. Something is not the same. But just to continue on with the sensitivity of the instruments. So the order of you're saying is that the order of magnitude from one instrument to the next.
18, 31, 30s in our lab, and these are all new, and we've noticed dramatic differences between the model when they came in and between each instrument. And it is extremely difficult to normalize all the instruments so that you can have the same parameters on every instrument. It's very difficult, if not impossible, because there's differences with every upgrade. The laser gets better. You change the laser, it gets better. The optics have changed, the ABI says. So I know from our own laboratory that there are huge differences in instruments.
Okay.
So your optimal may not be
their optimal.
They may need to raise the time, raise the volts.
Mm-hmm.
And on your instrument, you may need to decrease it so it's not overblown.
Right. Although
That could be what you're saying, and those are pretty low RFUs.
yeah, they are. They are. But I'm sure it's a combination of things. A lot of things going on in the laboratory.
Lab to lab.
So Kelly, at least Kelly's sample for the most part turned out. So we knew that probably there was a combination, probably also user. I mean, you know, when you were collecting your samples, some of you know you flipped your sample, you touched it by accident, things like that. A lot of things happen. But at least we know, at least partially, that we were getting some of the system to work. Okay. So let's look at some of the samples you guys did. This first one was group 1. And I'm only going to show you the ones that even turned out marginally. Group 1. Okay, who was group 1? That was Nick. Who's NZ? And Nicole. Okay. The one that turned out was the 30 sperm collection. So that was the first one. I think, Nick, you collected that. Yeah, I got it. No.
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 Yeah, I'll say it. Just curious, which
So, let's see, which ones did you get right? So you did get the 17. That's good
Where'd
news.
you get the 11 from?
But
Yeah.
what's that?
Where's the 11
Where's
from?
11 coming from?
D8.
Yeah, I know. There's different. That. Unfortunately, we also didn't have time to look at the raw data, go through to see if the 11 was maybe some other artifact in the electrophoresis. This is just kind of regurgitated out through the software.
I got the 30.
What's that?
I got the 30.
So you didn't get any of the FGA. You did get a Y. I don't know where this is big old question mark. Did get the 30, nothing here in D18.
I don't think so.
I don't know how to do this live. Hey Kelly, do you know how to just erase the whole thing? You did that before.
You mean erase the highlighter?
Yeah,
Click the mouse
yeah.
arrow and then click the screen.
Click the screen.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm hoping that's going to work. Yeah, thank you. So, and then you got the 11. You got the 11, but you missed the 10. And here you got the 10, but missed the 9. And then here there's nothing, obviously. That you got. So you did get some profile. So just kind of going through this. And this was, again, for 30 sperm. And Kelly had talked about their target is 50 sperm, and they get nice results. And typically, my target is 30 sperm, and I get nice results. It's kind of optimized.
What's the scale on the, I guess you guys call it rocks? Is that what it is?
The rocks?
Yeah.
What's this? Oh, what was the scale?
Yeah.
Did you want to?
Compared to the other colors?
Oh, it's. that one. Is that what you wanted? To kind of get an idea of the,
Whatever your internal length standard is.
it's about 1,000? Yeah.
So it is tenfold higher than.
My suspicions are it's the 30.
130
That's what
or
I'm
the
thinking.
instrument.
You
The
think it's the
sensitivity.
instrument?
Yeah, that's
part
my
of it?
suspicion. I think kind of like what Teresa was saying. I think because we only have one 3130 instrument in our lab, and it just seems like compared to the state police, and they have how many at Louisiana? 3 or 4, and they have differences in sensitivity too.
Okay.
How much rocks did you add compared to what you added here, and is your scale consistent?
Oh, see, I don't know, because see, we do the 377, of course, in our lab.
It'll vary with input.
Yeah, that's what I mean. If they put the same amount there and here, and their scales are similar, then it has to be something other than the instrument. Does that make sense? It's kind of convoluted.
Yeah, I'm sorry to say that group 2 did not get any results.
Do you think it's a
Group 3, let's see, who's group 3?
I think a lot of groups, when it came to evaluation,
They're already sent away.
So wait, it's been a while since I've worked on a CE. Can there be preferential injection of the standard? No.
Is that if the scale, I don't know, Christine, do you use a 3130?
Well, what we used was 3,100.
Which is less sensitive than the
Which is less
30.
And here, what's this instrument here?
I
Christine?
think it's a 3,100.
It's a 3100.
I'm just saying, relatively speaking, if you use the same amount of rocks when you did your experiment as you did here, and the scales for the rocks are the same, that means
Then-
it's not the instrument.
Right,
That
the
means it has to
sensitivity
be.
is the same.
Right, the sensitivity is at least relatively close. So
Right.
it's orders of
Support,
magnitude different.
Of course, yeah.
I
and
see
it's,
what you're
it's the
saying.
instrument.
Mhm.
Kelly might, not Kelly,
Yeah, I'm Kelly.
the
Oh,
other-
Carrie.
Carrie, she might have that number in her head, what that rock's.
Right.
But it depends upon the volume of
Yeah,
So
what
we have
Depends how
to
much
mix
product.
is.
Yeah,
Right,
how
if
much
you put
product
in
is-
3 microliters versus 1 microliter, the 1 microliter has higher rocks than the 3.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so group 3, and this was just 15 sperm. So let's see, you did get the 17, but not the 18. What?
There's a blip.
Oh, that little thing? Yeah, well, okay. It didn't pick up the 18, I'll say that's a 50 RFU. You know what we'll do? I see. We'll just kind of make it like this. There we go. Okay, anyhow.
We're getting carried away here.
Yeah, I know. It's getting late, I guess. So you did get the 21, but you didn't get the 22. Yeah, there's a blip there. You did get the Y, but not the X. The 13 came up. 30 came up. You see, there's some blips here. We don't know. Maybe those were it, of the 12, 15. You got the 11, but not the 10. Of course, there's a blip there. Don't know if, it could be stutter for all we know. You got the 9. Well, the 10 looks like it was trying. And then maybe that little blip was the 10. Yeah, that was 15 cells. And last but not least, group 4. And this was 30 sperm cells. And this happened to be, let's see, group 4. That was your first one. MT collected those, whoever MT is.
That's me.
Yeah. So let's see. The only ones we've got here the 20, 24. You have the X, the Y, but not the X. The 14, but not the 11. And then you've got the 30 and the 30.2. It looks like maybe it was trying to get a 13, 14 there, but not quite. 12, but not the 11. And 10, but not the 11. And then these obviously didn't show up at all. Complete dropout. So, I figured that when we did this, there would be kind of a 50-50 chance that maybe it would all work together. But at least it gives you kind of idea from the beginning to end that there is a process and that you can get some results. I do guarantee you that it's something to know that if you do this, there's going to be a period of time that you're going to have to optimize and practice to make sure that your technique is working well. We had to do workups in our own laboratory, and each one you're going to have. I'm sure you even had that when you have your capillary electrophoresis instrument. Sometimes there's little quirky things that you don't know when you get a new instrument. So, was there any questions on that? Okay. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to kind of start a round table. And
Christine?
Go ahead.
During the lunchtime, we were talking about what happened to the EP slides and the bits and pieces. They do fall intact into the cup, okay? Because I could see them in the cup, and the best way to test that was I did the fluorescent stain ones, and they were actually fluoresced in the cup down below. It's hard because the camera is not a great camera in terms of doing low-level fluorescence, so the camera was also interfering with some of the signal too. But I saw some of the bits and pieces down below. I wouldn't say that's a conclusive test, but my first result they're not.
Say that
Yeah.
pieces or sperm heads?
Sperm heads. Sperm head. I'm sorry, they fell intact.
So what they'd like us to do is the three of us at least. I need to bring our chairs over here to do the round table.
Oh, okay.
I'll just kind of put this list of things up there. Get the right side.
Yeah.
All right. So the next, we want to do this roundtable discussion, and it doesn't have to necessarily be in this whole order because I'm sure they'll all be intertwined at some point. But validation, I think, is kind of the thought process of what maybe some people are thinking of next. And I know Kelly even had written down some issues that may pertain to validation.
Well, I think a lot of mine are kind of QC issues, and like I said, casework considerations. But as far as validation, and Christine and I kind of were talking about this. Okay, there's developmental validation and there's internal validation. Now, I'm not sure because Christine has hers published. I don't know if you were to do like LMD in your lab, would theirs be considered still a developmental validation? Does anyone even know? I mean, has anyone been to the ASCLD training or the DAB training for auditors?
My understanding of validation, at least, is kind of always an ongoing process, and that there's this developmental validation. When do you say it's done? And then there's internal validation, and obviously developmental validation normally is kind of published material and things that are done like that. And the more papers that are published, you get to a point that maybe at some point there's a consensus of, yeah, it's been developmentally validated. I've got my paper, there's other papers that are coming out, and hopefully I've got a second paper in the works.
I'm hoping I'll put one at least, hopefully.
But in terms of that, I don't know at what stage then what you're thinking of, what would you need to do even to internally validate?
Right, or, because I mean, if you were, because I know some, like you guys already have a microscope, you have one, but it's not, I understand it, has it even been used yet, or?
Right,
No.
it's not been touched.
Yeah, and what about you back there?
Well,
You're
we've been
from,
working on one for a
you're
year.
Cal DOJ,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So you've
But
been,
it's not implemented yet.
but you're validating, right?
We're
Or-
developmentally validating.
Because,
We're not- yeah.
well, I pulled out the validation guidelines from the FBI website. And this is, she and I were kind of talking about this, a novel forensic validation. It says that it, like some of the key things are, okay, shall undergo developmental validation to ensure the accuracy, precision, and reproducibility of the procedure. And then it talks about species specificity, sensitivity, stability, mixture studies. And now, I know when you're reading this list of developmental validation, a lot of this I know at the time I think was sort of geared towards like STR panels, right?
Right.
Because I was talking to her and I was like, okay, do I have to do a species specificity study?
No, because
In
you're
my
using
question-
a stain that's
'Cause this
already
is a
being used.
Procedure,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
that's already,
this is, I mean, in a way, this is not really a DNA process. At
Exactly.
least
Right.
it's a
It's a
collection
serologic
process.
Right.
So how do we treat it? Do we treat it the same as we would if we were doing like a validation of differential extraction, something, an extraction process, things like that? I mean,
I think you'd have to do sensitivity, concordance, reproducibility, precision, mixture study.
Mixtures.
Right, I'm gonna
That
do
would
the
wrap it
mixture
up.
study. And then there was the stability. Would I have to do something as far as the slides?
Well,
No,
that
we
depends
just
upon
talked
your
about-
policy of whether or not you're gonna save them or not.
Right, see, and I think if we did ours for like 6 months out, that would probably be okay. But yeah, maybe it would be, because you guys still save all your extracts, correct, in the OCME?
Correct, but we all know extracts can degrade anyway, so I mean, it's,
Sort of a moot thing.
I think at minimum, people would want to know, okay, you prepare a slide, how, is it going to at least last through my analysis period? I
Right.
mean, it needs to last for, you know, I prepare one day, if the next week, is it going to be the same as if I did it the day after? And then depending on, do you ever, you know, do you store these things and do you go back to them? But I'm thinking that probably a shorter term study, I mean, a few months, rather than, you wouldn't need to do a long-term study.
Not to complete it, what
Like
we
you.
would do, which is maybe like what you said, is the 180 days, is, you know, test it out to then.
Right.
And if you get some, hey, it's good up to then.
Right.
That's all we keep
You're
it for.
going to generate slides. If you're going to generate a slide every month, you can then, after 6 months, go back to slide 1, 2, 3, 4, and test them that way.
Exactly.
And just go back and recut, because most of these slides are going to have spermatozoa on them, or the ones that you don't have to do non-probative evidence on last lifetime. You just have to take a slide and say, okay, are these sperm still tight at this period?
Right.
Or on longevity, is this sperm highlighter stain still fluoresce after 8 or 9 months, or have we lost anything? And same for fish. Will it last in storage, or do you simply, a lot of fluorescent stuff will bleach out, so do you just simply throw it away at the end of it? The other thing I think is talking about is documentation, but I know that's not part of validation now, but it may be something you want to consider.
Well, it does say for not developmental validation, wait, let's see. Shall include the following. Talks about characterizing locus, we don't need to do that. Oh, I thought, yeah, well, I mean, you have to document it anyway, right?
I think with Christine's paper, then if you have another one, and or if you guys do it, that's something we could use.
Right, I'm
to
just wondering
point to, okay, here's the developmental stuff, now this is what we did internally.
One of the
Yeah.
questions in court is accepted in the scientific field. And if, once you start getting it published, then by peer-reviewed journals, then you have established, okay, that it may be accepted or is accepted in the scientific field. So that's
Well,
part of it.
Well, and part of that, if we were to get into court issues, but of course it's accepted in other fields besides forensic science.
Right.
You know, that of course we can,
But that was always the issue when the RFLPs and STRs, are these statistical methods generally accepted in the scientific field? It was always the argument, yes, it's accepted by other science, but then forensic science has always held itself as a slightly separate science or a different science from some of the others, because we don't work with nice, pristine material. We work with material that's been abused or broken down or things like that, things that have compromised the samples to some extent.
well, now, Christine was saying that, you know, no, this is a way of collecting your samples, so no, you wouldn't necessarily have to do some of this stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, DAB is a DNA standard, right? But is this
yes.
a collection method or is it a
No, I think
DNA method?
sensitivity, concordance, reproducibility, precision, and the mixture, you can't get away from that.
Kind of
Right.
somewhere in between.
Right.
Every procedure has that, though. Every procedure has that issue. Well, at least in our laboratory, every procedure you have to validate with those parameters.
Right, and so then since I've done this, let's say with Identifiler, if we were only gonna use it for Identifiler, would we still, because of course we use SGM Plus and Profiler panels, would we still test it with those two, yeah?
No, I don't think
No?
so. I mean, I think
I think it would be the
I
quant.
think you're
That's up to
validating the
quant.
recovery of your DNA and then what profile you're getting. And so why would I would just pick one system and go with that, and then you could correlate that to whatever other system you use in your lab. Why would you need to?
That won't,
The question is
our
what-
last audit, they jumped all over us about that.
No, tell them what it
We
was.
did the easy one, which is just a DNA purification process. And we did everything. We went through Quantifiler, and then we
What did we do?
did with Cofiler. we amplified it in a co-filer and got all nice profiles and shows no contamination, whatever. And they found us to death on that one. They said, oh, you didn't do easy one with SGM plus, profiler, co-filer, and in mitochondrial DNA and all of these things. And that was a finding.
Wow.
They basically said, well, you didn't validate it for every single
It's an extraction.
that's
Afterstar
what we-
protocol that you use.
We thought because of, right, and
So,
extraction.
I mean, I agree with what you're saying. If this is
You don't
not,
get quant.
this is not an Amphastar amplification. Well, they do have amplification here, but depending on what auditors you get, they can decide and define different things. That's what they determine validation is.
Did you
I'm just saying
appeal
that's-
that finding?
Yes, we did.
Was it upheld or was it?
Well, we ended up, the fact of the matter is, they made a finding, but we had been using it for the last year after validating it that way. So we had experience with all the other kits. And we just said, look, the last year we've been using these kits, and we have not seen any difference in amplification. Plus, several years ago, when we used Amphastar Green 1 and Blue, I don't know if any of y'all remember those, and we went to Profiler, we showed that the variation in peak heights between Green 1 and Profiler and Blue, there's no significant difference in the overlapping loci in there. So we have experience to show that, yes, there's no significant difference in peak heights that you obtain for the crossover loci or crossing loci, but that's basically all we could say. They were inflexible on that particular point. If you didn't validate it for every style of amplification you did, then it was not a validated protocol.
Now, do you think you would be have difficulty with when you're talking about developmental validation? We also have different instrument kind of platforms, I guess you can say. Do you think that that people are going to have to almost kind of rework it for each instrument?
I don't think
How
so.
else do you get results though? You're gonna
It's an internal.
lift,
That's-
Well,
extract.
internal, that's internal
Is that the
validation.
internal?
That's internal.
But do you think you would have any difficulty with the developmental side?
Once you reach the threshold of general acceptance in the community, scientific community, all you need to do at that point is just have the references on hand. That's it. So developmental validation, I think you're really not that far away from that. A lot of the stuff we're talking about is more internal validation.
Right, I think-
All this sensitivity and things like that, that has to be done in your lab. Make sure
The
it's-
low
Right.
copy number
That's part of
procedure.
internal anyway.
That is
yeah.
internal. That is internal.
Because
Yeah.
your low copy number procedure was already validated,
Right,
whatever you did, and then you
redesigned.
took it and used it with your laser.
Right.
You know, so I would think that that part's already validated, and then you just went and found a new collection technique and then went from A to B, now B to C.
Well, do you all feel, at least with what we presented, that you have jumping off points at least if you were to buy a microscope? Yeah.
Well, yeah, because now
Or
we
is it
have,
something you see a deficit in what I've done maybe that I need to do, or you know?
well, now we have options on like what the extraction part of it's gonna be. But that would be one of our concerns in our internal validation is, because we don't use Lysin Go, or we don't use, the Pro-K, just Pro-K with DTT. That would have to be internally validated.
Right.
Because we don't do it.
Mhm.
And then low copy number, the increased cycles.
Right.
That would be the important thing we would have to.
Right.
But cutting it out and put it in a tube, you guys done that already.
Right.
And we already amp with the Identifiler, and we already use the 310 and the 3130, so that wouldn't be a big part of it.
Yeah.
And we have to do that to
You have
get
to do that anyway.
to get to the end,
Yeah.
yeah. But
Internal.
it's
You would
those
have-
other things in between that we don't do, we have to really concentrate.
Well, the real question, I mean, and it's this simple. If it comes down to it, do you have to validate the use of scissors to cut a piece of cloth?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love the way this guy
I think that, at least the way I'm looking at it, there's actually there's a division of how this procedure is really being implemented. There's the first step, which is literally just the cutting. And is it
And separating.
scissors, a sterile scalpel, or a pulse laser? That is a cutting technique. And that validation, at least in my mind, is really, can you take this cutting and not destroy the sperm during the cutting technique itself? Does the film interfere with the DNA testing? Is there contamination being induced? Just basically looking at a performance check or a validation of the cutting procedure itself. But then when you start talking about Lysin Go and Qiagen columns and the extraction procedure, that would be like a lab that's doing organic only, introducing Chelex and not doing a Chelex validation. because they say, well, we already have validated extraction and we don't feel we need to validate QLEX. The fact that the amplification parameters are going to have to be optimized and that there is actually a different extraction procedure being introduced, that's where it falls under the DNA thing, at least solidly in my mind. That is solidly under the DAB guidelines. But the cutting technique, while I think it still fits in that general realm, what you're evaluating for the cutting, I think, is a slightly different variation. You just want to make sure that it's actually getting into the tube and, you know,
You've
it's
collected
not
it.
contaminated, it's not being destroyed by the UV light, you know, whatever.
I think you may have one prior step to that we've now noticed is how well the sample is retained on the slide. The fact that we've seen with the director slide, that they're kind of slippery or slide off, okay, is there some loss that we may have based upon that slide? Or is there a better fixing procedure? So I think we probably, because of what we've seen, again, these are brand new slides, we may have to step back one and say how well are these samples being fixed to the slide. And then you go into the processes of the sperm paint and the chromosome paint. Those are separate issues of staining those and making the identification. But as far as a simple sperm identification and cutting, I think a lot of the validation is out there on the table. It's just waiting to be organized and
I
summarized.
think the main issue too I see that needs to be addressed is the threshold number of sperm that you consider when you go ahead, because when you start to fall into low copy, it scares me to have everyone think there has to be a lot of caution in the interpretation. And I think it's a great technique and you don't need to apply low copy number necessarily. If you keep your threshold at what looks like for you, Kelly, was 50 cells and above, and you don't have to worry about the extra reproducibility needed and calling something a false homozygote. When you start to push the envelope, you're opening the doors to needing to do, in my opinion, an extremely thorough validation to make sure in your own hands that you don't call anything incorrectly. So to kind of just get it on the line, online quickly, it's easier to set your threshold, know what's reliable, and go forward. And you know, maybe you miss a few cases in the beginning until you get everything set.
Well, one thing Kelly is saying is that if we are able to find sperm fairly easily, and that was what you were saying, if you can find 50 relatively rapidly, no problem, it is a fast technique. It is a quick, it's going to be quicker than the differential. If you set, like you said, 50 spermatozoa, we go through it, we can do it, we're ready to go with it. Because a lot of our slides, we either find a lot or very few or none. But the ones you find a lot of, you can finish those in a couple of days based upon it. And you've got basically clean profiles. It's the ones, like you said, if you drop below 50, okay, where can we go from there? That would take a longer validation, but I think it's going to be a point that's going to have to be validated, because if you can find 50 sperm, that's fine, but what happens if you only find 40? You know you're not going to throw it away. You know, initially you may be right, but let's not do much with it. But at some point, it's just like the DNA. At some point, you know, we say, okay, we're not going to drop the threshold below 150. But as the more and more we got into the market or into the casework, we said, well, you know, 100 is working okay. We've looked at 150 for the last 2 years, and now 100 is okay, and now we're down to 50. Most people, I think, are using their RFE threshold at 50. So at some point, okay, we start with 50 sperm. We feel comfortable with that. Now, at some point, can we say, okay, well, here we are at 25 because we're getting a few more cases, and the next year we'll go down to 15 or 10.
I just think the validation is much more complex.
It is, but I'm saying it's the same when we started the RFU threshold at 150. It made everything really simple, but then we started seeing cases we were missing or samples we were missing, and so as the years have gone by, most of the labs have dropped their threshold down to as low as 50 or 75 RFU. And I think the same thing would happen for spermatozoa. You start at 50, but you're going to want to keep going lower, and it may take time, more validation, more experience to see what happens when you do 25 and 10 and 15.
In my mind, and I think we're thinking along the same way, for immediate implementation, though, I think most people would buy this instrument as a cutting tool and work those samples into their current processing scheme, and then develop the low copy number, added cycles, different extraction. I mean, that to me that's pretty far down the road.
Yeah. That's what I was trying to do, was just get it on this very nice, you know, when you have a nice sample, and you know, then you can cut and go, and that's kind of what I was I'm trying to do.
That was Kelly's good point. She wanted to be focused on getting
Yeah.
the sperm in there. I'm looking over there and say, wow, this is new capabilities and enhanced
Yeah,
possibilities.
Pat has so many.
Let's see, what other things can we do with this thing? Maybe we can etch metal or something, do some metal analysis, place some metals and do some suck off the air and do the metal, or maybe even drugs or something like that. I don't know. It's just all these different techniques you might be able to do. But yeah, I think it's well focused, and I think as far as doing sperm ID, I think it's a good point. Just stay at 50 and say, here's what we do when we get 50. We can run it, and everyone likes it really good.
As far as developmental validation goes, in terms of what you guys have done, it'd be nice to see more casework type samples.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, what I see that you need.
Well, and I have, because Pat had already done studies on how much of your sample is actually retained on the cotton swab. And what I did, because like I said, we save our samples, pre-amplification work product samples for about 180 days, and then they can be discarded. So what I did was, when I knew people were going to be throwing out their work product, I actually took them, and I have a whole batch of just swabs and spinnies tubes that I'm going to go back and re-extract, off the swab, and I have a lot of those. So I'm hoping I can do, kind of Christine suggested, try to do a large casework study or whatever, and I'm hoping I can, do a lot of those onto LMD slides and do a large.
It'd be nice, ideally, to see them side by side with your current protocol.
The first,
Concordia.
right? The first, you're saying the first set of results from the
The only samples are being thrown away. We already have prior results.
Right, and we do. That's why I picked them.
There are actual cases that have been worked and reported.
And we're positive.
But now they're just being discarded into research.
Yeah.
I don't know how many you need to do. That's something
I've got a lot, but yeah.
We also have about, I don't even know the numbers anymore, but I know it's a lot, about 30 to 50 of these discarded cases, the ones that were collected in the real world. They've gone out and they've collected them. They contain fingernail scrapings, bite mark, swabs, vaginal samples, and all of those are cases that have been delegated to research only, and they're just sitting in the laboratory at room temperature right now. So those are all really good research level cases, non-probative cases that have been collected just the way they'd be collected and not just for research samples.
But we don't know if they're positive.
Yeah, we don't know if they're positive or
negative. There'd be more
negative.
work into that. Yeah, you'd have to do true,
I think you'd have to do substrate studies too.
That was something I was wondering about.
Like, as you take it off the swab, do you have to do it off the sheet type material, the clothes? I don't know. I'm like, is it necessary, or do you think you should have to do it anyway because it's new and you better more?
Well,
That's what I was wondering.
the thing is, we take them off those clothing samples and run them through differential right now. So is there any other way? I mean, basically you have to get them off of a pair of panties or a shirt. We do that now anyway. I mean, we already do that for the differential.
Yes, anyway, we've already
Yeah, I mean, we're already doing that.
The only reason you have to validate it is if you change the way
Yes.
you normally do.
Right,
But
right.
if it's the same way, that's done already.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, when we did our comparison of going through the tube versus staying on the slide, we just took samples we extracted from a cotton swab and put it down there. And here's half the half the pellet on the slide, and here's half the pellet through the tube, and we ran them the same down concurrently. So we're not changing that. That's the only thing that's the same. I mean, it's the same.
One point that someone else brought up in the other class, that he was saying that if you were to swab a condom that has spermicide on it, sometimes that can interfere with putting it on the slide, the spermicide itself. And I actually do have a condom case in mind that I worked that was positive for sperm that I'm going to try to go back to. Hopefully I can use it as a non-probative. I have to just make sure it's adjudicated. But yeah, as far as substrate goes, yeah, I don't know how much of that we'd have to. I don't think it's required. It might not be a bad idea, but right. I mean, if we already have done that with PBS,
But I think you would absolutely have to do the substrate controls or the substrate differences to validate the different extraction procedure if you implement something other than a traditional chelax or traditional organic.
Right. You're saying like if
you went
were
to
doing
lice
the
and
lice
go, you would have to do denim and cotton
Right.
and latent print,
To see if there's
adulterated,
an
all of
inhibition.
those things to see if there's a problem with that carrying into a different
right,
extraction
and you're not
procedure.
cleaning it up.
Not the cutting part.
Oh.
Not that I think there's anything different about the way it's going to look on the slide, but there could be something that's carrying into
the piece.
Because you have to validate the extraction. So when you validate the extraction
and the
you have to do
amplification
substrates.
if those are not exactly the same.
I see.
I'm going to, so we can move along a little bit. I know, Kelly, you also had a lot of notes written on quality assurance, quality control. I don't know if anything on competency training.
Well, gosh, competency training seems so far down the road.
Well, we can then, if it does seem, then we can just talk about, if
No,
you
I
wrote some
do
things
have
about.
other QC issues, but one we've already talked about, quantification. Should that be done? We don't necessarily have to go back into that. Okay, one thing I keep thinking about, and maybe you guys can kind of toss this around too. How would you process a blank for this procedure? Because I was thinking to myself, okay, at first I was actually putting a blank tube on there, putting the TE4 or whatever blank and just cutting a couple tubes and going with it. But then I'm like, well, when you're actually cutting evidence, whether it be a swab or whether it be, a pair of underwear, you don't have a tube sitting there. So do you have to put a blank tube on the tube holder for the LMD, or can you wait till you actually start the process and put your first reagent in? Like my first reagent, of course, is the TE4 when I cut. Would it be okay to put the TE4 in my tube when I dry all the samples? Because I dry the TE4 off. Is that where my blank would start? What are people's ideas on a blank processing?
When you dry
We
it?
would start there, just
You
like
think
you
so?
said, yeah. If your validation showed that the instrument, you would probably want to set up where you had one slide that had plenty of cells on it that you're cutting, the next tube had nothing in it, and you would pretend to cut stuff. But that'd be just in your validation part. And if you could show time after time you received no contamination on the non-cell slides, then that should be enough. I don't think you have to put a blank on every time you set up a cut.
Basically, you have 4 slots in
Right.
there, and our microscope only has 1 slide holder. So we're thinking in terms of, okay, if you're going to do a sample, you may do 1 tube for the sperm, 1 tube for the epithelium, and then 1 tube is a blank under there. And then
But
you
then,
pull
of
it out.
course, you're using up a tube, and I like the idea of at least doing 2 cuts. Like I did in those casework examples I did. I kind of liked that because, as you saw in the one picture I showed you, I had some kind of high stutter on the shorter loci, and then if I had a second amp, that would make me feel more confident and maybe call, to make sure that those were in fact just high stutter or whatever. So I did like the idea of having like 2 tubes for sperm and 2 tubes for epi cells. But then if I wouldn't have room for a blank tube, so.
Then that's a blank for every sample.
Yeah.
We don't do that.
Right.
The only way that would be good is if you have that static stuff going on. You can see what's floating around there.
Right.
Because my concern is having tubes open there. And you certainly wouldn't want different case samples with tubes open, but even a non-sperm sperm, I don't know if that's a violation or not, to have them open at the same time when you're doing a collection.
Well, essentially it's the same sample.
They
Right,
are, but they're
But
two
it's being
separate.
divided.
Well, I definitely
Yeah.
think you wouldn't.
No, I know they are,
Yeah.
but I'm just thinking with tubes being open at the same time. Like, you have a row of tubes that are open at the same time. And
Maybe you're on a robot.
Automation
you're
has that
open at
robot,
the same time.
yeah.
Well, and
guess.
I think at least the good thing is you would definitely never have, you're just gonna have 1 case on there,
Yeah.
hopefully, at a time.
Yeah.
So that would, to me, would be key. I know with the new, Leica, there's room for 3 slides, but I'd probably just always have 1 on there at a time anyway. But yeah, I can see what you're saying about open tubes, but right, automation, but of course they
Yeah.
usually have an internal blank or something, right, on the plate, or an internal posit somewhere on the plate
Right.
for QC check.
Right.
And that would just about putting a blank on the tube holder.
So,
But of course that cuts down 1 sample you can do.
right. Let me see, what else did I have as far as QC?
I comment on competency. I know why. First off, everyone's done sperm identification on a microscope, so it's not like you'd have. That's not a new technique. You just like getting a new microscope. Yes, I can see them. I can stain them. That's already been done. The cutting part, I'm sure you'd have to have them practice cutting, practice using the microscope, learn how to use the software. That's all part of can you use the software competency. The single tube extraction or pre-amplification lysis is not a hard technique, but I don't think it would. You wouldn't say here's some tubes over here. Go do single sample. You do it. Okay, go cut yourself some tubes and learn how to do it. And then interpretation, low copy number, our amping, we've already done reduced volume in our laboratory, so it's not like we're doing a lot of changing there. But if you were going to do reduced volume amps or lyse and go, I think that would require more competency training. And I think many labs have had people have already had low copy number interpretation issues. There's guidelines out there for that. So there's not a whole lot of competency training that, or at least I don't believe a whole long-term competency training or any novel issues in here. Just maybe a period of practice time and learning how to use instrument software and manipulating the small tubes.
Any other thoughts on what he just said?
Well, you may want to add a qualifying set at the end where you just give them, one or two slides.
Oh, certainly.
They have enough.
Right,
You
right.
should get a profile
That
at the end.
competency training versus competency. Yeah, they have to have a competency test.
Right.
So that would be some slides that you know what was on there.
Kelly, did you have any more QA topics?
I'm trying to think. Sort of we talked about it. Would you do, a 2-tube or a 3-tube collection of your sample, duplicate or triplicate amp? We've kind of talked about that a little. Probably if you went into lower numbers, low copy number, you definitely want to do that. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
If you got 50 sperm, would you need a second amp?
Yeah.
Because you're getting, it's almost looking like a regular profile. If you had 5 or 10 sperm, you might want to do a second amp.
Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Especially people with experience with low copy number. I know you guys do best of 3, right?
No, we do 2 of, no, it's more complicated than that. We do look at something has to appear 2 out of 3 times to be called, and then mixtures are a whole nother ball of wax.
Okay. So you're saying if those were clean like single source.
Source profiles, the allele has to appear in 2 out of the 3 amplifications.
And
But
are those identifier?
Correct.
Okay.
But you see things flip, or you do see something that looks
Right.
like stutter, and then you amp it again, and it's taller.
Right.
So it can be tricky if you don't look at it.
Well, first amp you might see the 10, the next amp you might see the 9, and not the other, vice versa.
Right.
Yeah.
I would like to duplicate it personally, but that's probably seems
It's
like
almost
that's pretty
impossible
debatable.
with
So.
low copy number. Yeah.
It seems like if in your validation studies, 50 cuts, shows consistent and reliable and reproducible
Yeah.
results above the threshold, then
It'd be
probably
just
okay.
like
But it's
a
a
1
matter of
nanogram sample.
It's a matter of validating it.
Yeah.
You got to show it works.
Well, and that's always the question. Like, how many times do I have to show that the 50 works? So far out of out of the last 20 I've done, they've all worked.
Well, what does Butler say, 50?
He says a 50 total for the internal validation for all your experiments.
He's a minimalist.
Yeah, Pat's like,
I like it.
Are your RFUs always approximately the same when you do 50?
Yeah, I have to actually crunch the numbers still, but yeah, I mean they all look like they're at least averaging 500 to 1,000, RFUs. So, yeah, I have to crunch the numbers on that.
If you do 2 amps, would you want to do it in 2 systems, say identifiler and minifiler?
No, because mini filer's too expensive.
I know it's very well. The 10 microliter reaction is pretty inexpensive.
And it's still more money though. At least ours, we had 400 reactions per kit for identifiler. But if you got it in identifiler, why do you need to do mini filer?
I'm just saying if you wanted duplicate amps,
I would just do the same thing again, so I could see everything twice.
QA issue. I think it'd be nice to have some kind of environmental recommendations, because you have one humidity set, you have another humidity set, temperatures and things. It may be nice for a laboratory who's looking into this to have some kind of guideline as to the environmental conditions they need to set up, like the size of the room, things like that, because this is almost so specialized it needs to have its own environment.
So I want to kind of add some, I'm sorry, did you have a comment? Okay. I want to kind of move on and add some of these other topics that are on the list.
I have a comment.
Okay.
I'm going to let Lois say goodbye formally to the group before she has to leave. Well, I'm going to let you do that
Okay,
though
yeah,
before
because
they
then I'll
move on
probably
to
see
another
you out.
subject.
So, just want to thank everybody. This should not be on camera.
As a community to implement this, and I think it's kind of an NIJ thing too, money, I guess, is for those of you especially who don't have instruments, what are you thinking in terms of how are you going to fund this? Maybe Lois, you can give us some insight of.
Well, I think everyone knows, we have our, I'm sorry, okay, well, you can decide. We do have very active, well-funded DNA programs. Our '08 programs we're not sure about yet, but this could be funded under your capacity grants. This past year, capacity and casework were kind of combined, but if you were going to use this in casework, this would be something that would fall very easily under those programs. I know some states get a lot more money than other states, so it might be easier for some than others. And I guess there's things you have to work out within your state too, to determine how much each agency gets. But then we have our Coverdell program, which is a true formula program with a competitive portion also. That's usually used for non-DNA disciplines, mostly because there's so much money for the DNA programs. But it could also be purchased under those programs. And hopefully your agencies will also see the benefit of it and would consider using state funds for something like this, or parts of it. Because it's... Are you laughing at that?
I'm not laughing, but surrogate
right.
use of federal funds in place of state funds is illegal. So don't let your state or locality do that. They should, if they want to buy something for you, they should buy it for you. And if there's federal funds for it for the first time, great. But don't let them buy 15 things the same way with federal funds. So, but
Did anyone want to add in terms of that particular topic about, their commitment? When I saw that topic, I wasn't sure, and you kind of explained it, like, where are you going to get the funding? Were people thinking along those lines that perhaps, considering the cost of these instruments, where you might get the funding?
A few years ago, I'll just say this now, we were funding a lot of research in qPCR, Mark's group at Cal DOJ and Eric Buell's group in Vermont. And I know that's cost a lot less money than the microscope. But what I was hearing, 3, 4, 5 years ago was, we'll never be able to purchase what are we going to do with a qPCR machine? Even in those days, they could do a lot more than DNA quantitation. They could do genotyping, and that's what I was hearing a lot. So now, I mean, everyone, or just about everyone, I assume, has a qPCR machine. So I think the way it looked to me is once the value was demonstrated and people wanted them, then, ways were found to purchase them. So, I'm hoping this exercises like these few days and other things can kind of encourage the agencies to prioritize something that will really benefit.
Well, isn't that kind of like the 377 instruments, or right? Because I mean, at some point, people realized they needed those, and then they were funded, or the 3130s or the 310s. I mean, how did people fund these instruments?
Well, I mean, I assume they use a lot of their federal grants for it, as well as their own money. But it seemed like the qPCR machine was kind of an outlier because everyone was thinking the QuantaBlot and so, but it seemed like once people were on board and people saw how valuable they were, now everyone has one.
They had a kit. Once they had a kit.
Yeah, but I like to think the kit came about because there was, the companies knew that people wanted a kit.
AB also has a small hand in that, though, in the fact that they don't make one anymore. So they didn't give you much of a choice.
Well, but the qPCR is so much.
It is better. I agree. It is better.
This week, or these days that you saw it, did y'all get an idea of the usefulness of laser microdissection? I mean, did you think it's something you really might want to look at in the future? All the people that maybe really hadn't seen the laser microdissection really in action?
Well, and I even asked the
Did
previous.
it convince you?
I was going to say, I even asked the previous group, did you feel that if your lab doesn't have a microscope yet and you really wanted one, that now you have information that you could go back with and say, you know what, we think this would be great, and whatever. Maybe you would have more leverage to buy a microscope with the information. I mean, did it help in that way for those that don't have one? That's good.
Carl, did you have a comment?
I did. Phraseology on the fourth point on this roundtable discussion is we've used this kind of discussion in other workshops. It also gets at a point, I think I heard a little bit, you guys were there already. It's not so much just, do you have the money? Is the forensic biology community ready to do this kind of change in how you think about quantification or assessment is the community ready to make that next step? Because you'll be forcing the hand of the SWIG dams and others in the world, and the forensic defensibility ultimately of the results you report have to have community acceptance, or they're not going to be accepted in court. So that's kind of what that last point gets to. You've had many discussions that have been very substantive on this matter already. But if you had any ideas that the community's just not ready, so even if you spent the money, it's a waste of money. It seems to me like the community is ready to go forward in these kinds of substantive steps with new technologies. As an outsider to biology, I'm a chemistry guy. So I heard this with LCMSMS. It was originally going to be used for confirmations for drugs that were found on immunoassays and spot tests. But now they're looking screening with LCMSMS on driving cases because they get 150 identified substances and metabolites in 5 minutes. Changed everything. So it sounds to me like your community's ready as well. That's good to have on there.
It's a lot more expensive. I should say, the LCMSMS is much more expensive.
That's about 250,000.
Is it really? Oh,
And Georgia just bought 5 of them. Yes, ma'am.
really? That puts it in perspective.
Yep.
And that happened in
They
part.
say DNA gets all the money.
Not me personally, but because we funded GBI to do a project using LCMSMS for toxicology purposes, and they were very successful. They did the validation, they developed protocols, and now
Was
others
that
are.
also an ABI instrument?
It's an ABI instrument.
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah, I know ABI.
Andy,
Probably has a lot of consumables. They're expensive too.
were you going to add something, or okay?
Was holding the microphone.
Looking at just kind of the other topics on here.
What about harmonious implementation?
Yeah, Carl, what did you mean? What was harmonious implementation?
Yeah, Carl has to talk.
It's a magic. Harmonious implementation is a way of getting around the phraseology standards or guidelines, because that has really negative connotations among forensic practitioners and laboratorians and directors and so forth. What it really comes down to, some of the comments I've heard today, if you're going to have 50 as what your limit's going to be, is everybody going to accept that? Will you be able to find competency among your examiners? How will you validate it? The validations in each lab will be different because the humidity is different and what you do is different, but will they be harmonious? I'm an ASTM E30 kind of guy. There's one way to do things that we write down that works well, but these are guidelines. There's other ways to do it right. But there is a harmony among the forensic biology community of what LCN means. It's not traditional. It's lower amounts of recovery that lends itself to profiles that are useful and probative and will be reported. That's the thing. It sounds like your community is there, and we kind of want that on the record so that when others in the public sector see this, they will know that the community has put its arms around this, even if it's not done exactly the same way in every laboratory. The community includes lawyers.
Well, I was going to bring up court because I saw that it was up there. Does anyone see any problems with this being accepted in court? I mean, can anyone foresee anything, or?
I don't think so.
No. The only thing I can think of course, is contamination. Oh, is this going to lend itself to
I think
contamination?
you really need to document that.
Right,
well, that
right.
It doesn't contaminate the next time
Yeah.
you put a slide in there.
Yeah, okay.
That'll be a key one.
Yeah.
Was there
And
any?
probably clean, how you clean the instrument.
Right,
things
right.
like
Oh, that was a
documentation
QC
and-
thing too, yeah.
Equipment maintenance.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would think that
But
would
since
show
that-
a
that
lot,
essential
then every
analysis,
time, I mean, you're looking for single source samples, or single source profiles, so, you know, obviously you're gonna, looks like you question, like I remember, I think Christina, it was your
that's
work,
how
you
that
kind of
gets
question
set.
when you had an extra allele.
Right.
Things like that, you know, you have to kind of take special considerations.
Was there any other, whether it's from the list of topics here or other issues that you're concerned with, that you'd like to bring up? The things that you've thought throughout the week or throughout the last couple of days.
Or any feedback, anything you would have liked to have seen in the class?
Feedback, that's true.
I would have liked to have seen more, another instrument to compare it to.
Yeah.
I think two vendors would have been powerful.
Yeah, I agree.
Even if like
We're
is
all
the
for it.
what everyone thinks is the best, just that maybe not everyone gets the same one, so you just can see.
Yeah.
Particularly if you haven't bought it yet. It would be.
Right.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, this list that we just got, I think that it was much more useful to get it at the very beginning, so we could discuss the or differences between different instruments.
microscope.
The different
Yeah.
type of
Yeah.
microscopes, yeah.
And by the way, Carl, where this reference came from?
That's something, yeah, it's something that Andy Lee had compiled, and I took a look at it.
Oh, okay, so it's, okay, thank
It
you.
is, okay, it's biased because it comes from me, and I've tried to make it as fair as possible. in terms of all capabilities.
Christine reviewed it. And are you seen all
Yeah, I
four?
should have
You've
looked
seen
at it.
all four instruments then?
Well, I've seen it, I have never actually operated anything but the Leica instrument, but through various, demos, I've seen the other instruments in action. So some of you probably have more experience, like on the Palm system, obviously have more experience than I have ever had.
Yeah, I think it probably would have helped to have a presenter or someone that had done the palm, at least if we couldn't have a palm microscope, or even one of the other ones, Arcturus. Or just like explain like what difference in catapult and gravity and
Yeah, it
pros
would
and
be just
cons.
useful to have it for the general audience. So.
Any other questions or feedback?
I mean, I think that the course, considering especially the time frame, we really just started this a few weeks ago, pulling this together, and I'm glad you guys all could come. And it was nice to see kind of a mix. Some of you had, even with the last class, some of you had instruments, some of you did not. And I'm actually glad to see that people are getting instruments and are very interested in this. I think that's it. Carl, was there any closing remarks that you wanted to make? No?
So we just would like to thank you guys for organizing
Yeah,
this.
thank you.
Very good.
Very great 2 days being here.
Good, good.